Have you ever truly noticed it? Some people walk into a room and before they have uttered a single syllable, before they have shaken a single hand or offered a single smile, the entire atmosphere shifts. Something in the air changes. You feel it in your chest before your mind can explain it. There is a weight to their presence, a quiet gravity, a sense that something of genuine substance has just entered the space. You find yourself wanting to be near them. You find yourself listening more carefully when they speak. And a single conversation with such a person, even a brief one, is enough to leave something behind in you that does not fade for years. They become part of how you think, part of how you see. And yet, and this is what has always fascinated me, there are other people who move through an entire life beside you and leave nothing. They are present at every gathering. They are familiar faces in every corridor. You have known them for years, perhaps decades. And still, if you were asked to describe what they brought into the world, you would find yourself searching and coming up empty. They pass through like wind through an open field. No trace, no resonance, as if they were never fully there at all. What accounts for this? What is the true source of this difference? Why do some human beings become unforgettable while others, despite years of proximity, simply dissolve into the background? Why are some regarded with deep, instinctive respect, while others, sometimes kinder, sometimes more accommodating, are met with a quiet, almost unconscious indifference? I have devoted the greater part of my intellectual life to precisely these questions, and I want to share with you what I have come to understand, not as abstract theory, as lived psychological truth. But I must warn you at the outset, what I am about to describe is not comfortable. The path toward becoming a person of genuine presence and real value does not run through ease. It runs through the willingness to look at yourself honestly, to confront what you have avoided, and then to summon the courage to show the world, without apology, without disguise, exactly who you are in your deepest nature. Most people are not willing to pay that price. They choose comfort. They choose the familiar smallness of blending in. But I do not believe you are among them, not if you are genuinely asking these questions. So let us begin with something that sounds, at first, almost counterintuitive. The extraordinary psychological power of your own absence. The human mind, and decades of observation have confirmed this for me beyond any doubt, is not designed to treasure what it perpetually possesses. We are neurologically, emotionally, existentially wired to desire what we might lose. Think of the sun. It rises every single morning without exception. It sustains every living thing on this planet. It is the most essential presence in our physical world, and yet almost no one pauses to feel grateful for it. We take it utterly for granted. But let an eclipse come. Let it disappear, even for a few minutes, and the entire world stops. People gather in the streets. They stare upward with something approaching reverence. Why? Because in its absence, they finally feel what its presence means. Absence restores awareness. Scarcity creates reverence. Availability, perpetual, unconditional, unlimited availability, destroys value. Not because people are ungrateful, but because the mind, quite automatically, discounts what it is certain it cannot lose. And this is the quiet tragedy I have watched unfold in so many human lives. People believe that the way to be valued is to always be there, to respond to every message within moments, to accept every invitation, to say yes to every request, to make themselves as accessible, as available, as accommodating as humanly possible. They believe, somewhere deep in their unexamined assumptions, that their absence is a kind of failure, a sign of inadequacy, but they have it precisely backwards. Absence, when it is genuine, is power. Genuine absence creates longing. It creates curiosity. It creates the psychological space within which value is born. Now, I am not speaking about games. I am not suggesting you manufacture a false scarcity or perform a withdrawal you do not feel. That kind of artifice is always transparent, and it always backfires. What I am describing is something far more real and far more demanding. I am describing the construction of an interior life so rich, so full, so genuinely alive with purpose and passion and engagement that your unavailability is not a strategy. It is simply the natural overflow of a life being lived at full depth. You have your own projects, your own ambitions, your own hunger to understand and to create and to grow. You are genuinely occupied, not because you are trying to seem important, but because you actually are engaged with something that matters deeply to you. And when you have built that kind of inner world, when people reach for you, they sense, even if they cannot articulate it, that they are reaching for someone who does not need them in order to be whole. And that, paradoxically, is the very quality that makes them want you most. You do not chase. You attract. Not through manipulation, but through the sheer gravitational pull of a person who is complete in themselves. I want you to pause for a moment and try something that may feel strange at first. Tomorrow morning, when you wake, before the noise of the day begins, go to the mirror. Look at yourself. Really look. And say 3 times, with whatever degree of sincerity you can muster in that moment, "I love you. You are worthy." I know it will feel awkward. I know something in you will resist it. We'll call it silly or self-indulgent. That resistance is itself significant. It is the internalized voice of every moment you were taught to doubt your own worth. But try it anyway, and notice what happens to the rest of that day. You may find, and I say this from both clinical observation and deep personal conviction, that you move through it differently, that small things open for you that were previously closed, because you began it by activating, in the most direct way possible, your own fundamental belief in your value. That is not mysticism. That is psychology. The second great dimension of genuine human presence is what I would call emotional sovereignty, the hard-won capacity to feel fully without being governed by what you feel. Let me be direct about something. The single fastest way to diminish your standing in the eyes of others, and far more importantly in your own interior life, is through reactive emotionality. I mean the pattern of responding to every provocation, flinching at every criticism, collapsing at every withdrawal of approval, exploding at every frustration. When your emotional responses are entirely predictable, you become, in the most fundamental psychological sense, manipulable. The people around you learn, consciously or unconsciously, exactly which words will destabilize you, which situations will make you defensive, which moments will make you crumble. And once they know your triggers, your inner life is no longer entirely your own. You become, in a very real sense, a puppet. Not because anyone has malicious intentions, but simply because your strings are visible and reachable. The person moving toward what I call full psychological maturity, toward the heights of human development, learns to do something that is genuinely difficult and genuinely transformative. They learn to place a moment of conscious space between what they feel and how they respond. They learn to observe their own emotional weather without immediately becoming that weather. They feel, and I want to be clear that I am not advocating for the suppression of feeling, which is its own form of damage, but they feel without instantly externalizing. They sit with the feeling long enough to understand it. And then they choose their response rather than having it chosen for them by reflex. This is not coldness. It is the opposite of coldness. It is a kind of emotional courage that most people never develop, because developing it requires looking directly at everything you have been avoiding. The parts of yourself you have buried. The grief you declared yourself over before you were. The anger you judged as unacceptable. The fear you masked as indifference. The longing you convinced yourself was weakness. All of these continue to operate from beneath the surface of consciousness. They do not disappear because you refuse to acknowledge them. They grow stronger in the dark, and they erupt at the least convenient moments in the least controlled ways. But when you begin the work of bringing these hidden dimensions of yourself into conscious awareness, when you say with honesty and without self-condemnation, "Yes, I carry this. Yes, this is part of me too," something remarkable happens. They lose their autonomy. They stop being forces that act upon you and become, instead, dimensions that you can understand and integrate. And from that integration comes a steadiness, a quality of calm that others feel as soon as they are near you, even if they could never explain why. People trust stability. People are drawn to groundedness. In a world that is largely composed of unexamined emotional reactivity, a person who has done the work of becoming inwardly steady is genuinely rare and genuinely magnetic. The third dimension I want to speak about is intellectual depth, and by this I do not mean the accumulation of credentials or the performance of sophistication. I mean something far more essential, the quality of a mind that has truly engaged with ideas rather than simply relayed them. Consider this question carefully. When people leave a conversation with you, how do they feel? Do they feel as though something in them has been expanded? As though a window has opened somewhere in their thinking that was not open before? As though they encountered a perspective they had never considered and now cannot stop considering? Or was the conversation simply pleasant? A comfortable exchange of familiar observations, easily forgotten by evening? This is not a trivial question. It speaks directly to whether your mind is genuinely alive or simply running on borrowed thoughts. The majority of human conversation, and I say this as an observer, not a critic, consists of repetition. People relay what they heard on television, what they read in passing, what someone else told them, what everyone in their particular social world already agrees upon. There is very little original thought, very little genuine wrestling with difficult questions, very little willingness to hold an idea up against the light, turn it, test it, and arrive at one's own conclusion rather than simply inheriting someone else's. This is what I mean by intellectual shallowness, and it is far more common than we like to acknowledge. And it makes a person, regardless of how pleasant they may be, ultimately forgettable, because they are not generating anything. They are only circulating. The self-actualizing person is different not because they are more educated, but because they are more genuinely curious. They read not to be seen reading, but because they cannot help themselves. Because ideas are genuinely alive for them, and the encounter with a great book or a rigorous argument feels like meeting something real. They engage with philosophy, with science, with art, with history, with psychology, not as boxes to check, but as territories to explore. And as their inner life grows richer, their conversation grows richer. They stop being able to sustain entirely trivial exchanges, not out of contempt, but simply because their mind has outgrown the appetite for them. And when they speak, there's a texture to what they say, a density, a specificity, a sense that the words are coming from somewhere real inside them rather than from the surface of what is expected. People leave those conversations different. They leave thinking, I have never heard it put quite that way before. I had never considered that. What else does this person see that I'm not seeing yet? That curiosity, that sense of there being more to discover, is precisely what makes a person worth returning to. And yet, and this is crucial, the intellectually deep person does not display their depth as a performance. The person who uses knowledge as ornamentation, who speaks to impress rather than to connect, who turns every conversation into a demonstration of what they know, that person, whatever their intelligence, has not yet matured into genuine wisdom. Real depth is quiet. It speaks when it has something genuine to add. It does not seek the spotlight. It simply illuminates whatever it touches. The person of true intellectual substance often says less than you expect, but when they speak, the room changes. Which brings me directly to the fourth quality, which I consider foundational to everything else: consistency. I want you to understand something about the way human trust actually works. We do not trust what we cannot predict, and we do not value what we do not trust. It is as simple and as profound as that. The person who is generous today and resentful tomorrow, principled on days when it costs them nothing, and expedient on days when their principles become inconvenient, warm in public and cold in private, that person may be charming, may even be fascinating, but they create a persistent unease in everyone who knows them, because no one can ever quite settle into a sure sense of who they are. And without that sureness, genuine respect is impossible. Character is not what you are when everything is going well. Character is what remains constant when circumstances make consistency difficult. The psychologically mature person has done something quietly extraordinary. They have elevated their values above their moods. They do not behave with integrity only when they feel like it. They behave with integrity because it has become inseparable from who they are. Because the gap between the person they show in public and the person they are in private has been closed by long, honest inner work. This alignment, this congruence between the outer presentation and the inner reality, is what creates genuine authority. People feel it even when they cannot name it. There is something in us that recognizes, at a level beneath conscious analysis, when a person is the same whether or not they are being watched. And that recognition produces a very specific kind of respect. Deep, instinctive, durable. Ask yourself honestly, are you governed by your principles or by your moods? On a bad day, when you are tired, when you have been disappointed, when someone has treated you poorly, do you still act from the values you claim, or does your behavior shift with your inner weather? This is not a question designed to produce guilt. It is a question designed to reveal where genuine growth is still available to you. Because the path toward consistency does not run through willpower alone. It runs through self-knowledge, through understanding why the inconsistencies exist, through finding the places where your values and your habits have not yet been brought into alignment, and doing the patient, unglamorous work of closing that distance. Now, I want to speak about something that is almost universally misunderstood in our time, particularly in a culture that has become addicted to self-expression and constant communication. I am speaking about the profound strategic power of silence, not the silence of passivity, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the chosen, deliberate, disciplined silence of a person who understands that words, precisely because they have power, must be used with care. The person who speaks constantly, who fills every pause, shares every passing thought, processes every feeling aloud, offers an opinion on every subject regardless of whether they have genuinely thought it through, gives everything away. In doing so, they create a very specific and very unfortunate impression that there is nothing left to discover. They have shown all their cards on the first meeting. And the fundamental human appetite for mystery, for depth, for the sense that there is more beneath the surface than can be seen, that appetite goes entirely unsatisfied. The person becomes, in the most precise psychological sense, transparent. And transparency, however honest it may feel, eliminates the curiosity that is the engine of genuine interest. The person of real depth reveals themselves in layers. Each encounter opens something slightly deeper than the last. People leave wondering what lies beneath the next conversation, what they have not yet understood about this person, what other dimensions remain to be discovered. And in any collective setting, any meeting, any gathering, any conversation involving more than two people, it is almost never the loudest voice that commands the most genuine attention. It is the voice that speaks rarely, but when it does, says something that could not have been said without the silence that surrounded it. The person who listens more than they speak accumulates something invaluable, a complete picture. They understand the room before the room understands them, and when they finally contribute, they do so from a position of having absorbed far more than they have revealed. That asymmetry, knowing more than you show, is itself a source of quiet authority. Others begin to wonder what you see, what you think, what your assessment is. Your opinion becomes something worth waiting for, and something worth waiting for is, by definition, something valuable. The sixth quality I want to speak about is one that cuts to the very center of self-regard, and it is this: the maintenance of standards. The standards you hold for how you allow yourself to be treated, the thresholds below which you will not permit your own dignity to fall, the quiet but absolute refusal to accept treatment that contradicts your understanding of your own worth. There is nothing that diminishes a person's standing in the psychology of others quite so swiftly or quite so thoroughly as the willingness to abandon their own standards in pursuit of acceptance. I have seen it again and again across my years of observation. The person who shrinks themselves to earn approval, who swallows their values to avoid conflict, who accepts contempt in exchange for company, that person does not, in the end, win the acceptance they are seeking. They win, instead, the confirmation of what they feared, that they are not worth treating well. Because people, consciously or not, take you at your own estimation of yourself. If you communicate through your behavior that you can be diminished without consequence, they believe you, and they behave accordingly. The self-actualizing person, the person who has genuinely grown into their own psychological potential, has done the interior work to arrive at a settled, grounded, non-defensive knowledge of their own value. Not the inflated, brittle value of ego, which must constantly be defended and reasserted because it is secretly uncertain of itself, but the quiet, undemonstrative dignity of a person who has made peace with who they are. From that settled place, they simply do not accept what falls below a certain threshold. Not with anger, not with drama, not with lengthy explanations or demands, but with the calm, matter-of-fact certainty of someone who knows what they deserve and has stopped negotiating it. And the extraordinary paradox is this: the moment you stop accepting poor treatment, people stop offering it. Not always immediately, but reliably, over time. Because the standard you hold for yourself becomes the standard others apply to you. You teach people how to treat you, not through speeches, but through what you will and will not silently absorb. And I want to name something important here, because I think it is the root from which most of these patterns grow. The lowering of standards is rarely a philosophical choice. It is almost always a wound. It comes from the deep, unexamined, often unspoken belief that one is not quite sufficient, not quite intelligent enough, not quite attractive enough, not quite accomplished enough, not quite lovable enough, to warrant the full dignity of being treated well. When that wound is healed, and it can be healed through honest self-examination, through the patient work of genuine self-understanding, the standards rise, not as a performance, not as a correction, simply as the natural expression of a person who has finally, genuinely understood their own worth. And now, the final and deepest quality, the one into which all the others ultimately flow. It is the matter of presence. The energy you carry as you move through the world, the atmosphere you create simply by being in a room before you have said or done anything at all. I want you to ask yourself, with genuine honesty, when people are near you, what do they feel? Do they feel steadied? Do they feel as though something calm and solid and trustworthy has entered the space? Do they feel more grounded, more at ease, more like themselves? Or do they feel the subtle but unmistakable transmission of anxiety, of need, of a person who is fundamentally uncertain of their own ground? Because this is transmitted. Always. Whether we intend it or not, whether we are conscious of it or not, we radiate the truth of our interior state. Not in our words, which are easy to control, but in the thousand subtle, uncontrollable signals of our physical presence, our tone, our gaze, our posture, the particular quality of our attention. The most fully developed human beings I have studied, the ones who had genuinely moved towards self-actualization, possessed a quality of presence that was almost impossible to describe, but absolutely impossible to miss. It was not dominance. It was not the aggressive assertion of status. It was something far subtler and far more powerful. A deep, unhurried stillness. A quality of being fully, solidly, contentedly inhabiting themselves. Like a river that moves without noise, but carries everything. They were not performing anything. They were simply, completely there. And people felt it. People were drawn to it. Not because these individuals were trying to attract anyone, but because genuine wholeness, genuine integration of the self, has a gravitational quality. We are drawn to it the way we are drawn to any source of real nourishment, because some part of us recognizes it as something we need and something we too are capable of becoming. How does one build this? Not through technique, not through the practice of a set of behaviors designed to simulate an inner state that does not yet exist. Only through the slow, unglamorous, absolutely essential work of becoming whole. Through the willingness to face what you have been avoiding, the old pain you have been carrying without acknowledging, the aspects of yourself you have rejected because someone once told you they were unacceptable, the grief and the fear and the anger that you locked away because the world seemed to require that you function as though they were not there. Through the patient, daily practice of learning to inhabit your own experience rather than fleeing it. Through therapy, perhaps, or through deep reflection, or through the kind of honest relationships in which there is space to be truly seen, through learning to be at home inside your own body, to walk through the world with a posture that says not, I am performing confidence, but simply, I am here, I am solid, I am real. Every detail of how you physically inhabit yourself speaks. A collapsed posture speaks of a person who has not yet claimed their own space. A gaze that meets the world directly speaks of a person who does not fear what the world might see. The concept I have devoted my life to, self-actualization, is precisely this. It is not the attainment of some perfect external condition. It is the movement toward becoming fully, authentically, integrally yourself. It is the progressive closing of the distance between the person you are in your deepest nature and the person you actually live as each day. And what I am describing across every dimension I have spoken about today, the genuine richness of your inner life, the emotional sovereignty that comes from knowing yourself, the intellectual depth that comes from thinking rather than simply repeating, the consistency that comes from having unified your values with your behavior, the power of measured silence, the quiet, unshakable dignity of maintained standards, and finally the quality of presence that only genuine inner wholeness can produce. All of these are expressions of a single movement. The movement toward becoming real. The world works constantly and systematically against this movement. It prefers that you remain predictable, manageable, easily categorized. It rewards conformity. It punishes authenticity with social friction. It will offer you, every day of your life, the comfortable alternative of remaining smaller than you are, of blending into the familiar shape of what is expected. And most people, and I do not say this with contempt, but with genuine compassion because I understand the weight of the pressures involved. Most people accept that offer, not in a single dramatic moment of surrender, but in 1,000 small daily accommodations that collectively amount to the quiet abandonment of their deepest potential. But there are those who do not. There are those who choose, repeatedly, imperfectly, sometimes at real cost, the harder and infinitely more rewarding path of becoming genuinely, fully themselves. And those are the people who walk into a room and change its atmosphere before they speak. Those are the people who leave traces in other lives that do not fade, not because they tried to be memorable, not because they performed a set of strategies designed to produce impact, but because they committed, deeply, honestly, over time, to the single most radical act available to any human being. The act of becoming, at last, completely and unapologetically who they actually are. That is the work, and it is yours to do, and it is worth everything it costs.